Good morning, my fellow yogic travelers. I am mighty glad to be alive today, and I hope that you are too, as we finish up our 5 day flyby view of some aspects of Hinduism and some of the teachers who have been Dharma tributaries into my river flow. And of course, the most effective and influential of all of them has been BKS Iyengar, which, although he is known for a rigorous physical practice, he always bristles if anybody thinks he's a physical yogi only. He's not an asana jock. And anybody who thinks that, they've never studied with him, because the moment you're in his class, you realize this guy's a mystic. And he uses the basic ideas of yoga, especially Kriya Yoga, Tapas, Swadhyaya, and Ishvara Pranidan. And he's just giving you the hit the mat is my way of reducing his teaching into the most important thing is practicing, walking your talk. Even if the sun comes up in the west tomorrow, hit the mat. And so in order to do that, you have to be an intense practitioner, and that's what tapas is like. It's turning up the Bunsen burner and exciting your life, creating heat, you could say, a kind of incubational aspect that's going to give you a breakthrough experience. In fact, Hatha Yoga it means force, but it doesn't mean forcing yourself into the posture. It means the force of effort that keeps you going to break through the inertia of laziness and not disciplining yourself and so forth. And of course, the idea is to not just discipline yourself in a way where it's a drill, a monotony, a repetition that's boring and dumbs you down, but to find innovation and creativity so that you work the form like a dancer that does the moves, and then when you've mastered the form, you're free to innovate and create and express yourself. So, in a certain way, the things I've picked up from him, I always like to say that I reduce the whole system down to Tadasana. When you're standing up in the bipedal position, because they say that what freed the brain to expand was not having our hands on the ground and our pelvis lifting up. So as soon as you can free your hands from the ground, a whole new brain potential became possible, in my opinion. And so that's called Brahma Sutra. Where is the median line? He says God is the median plane. Vector force equilibrium is enlightenment. How do you bring everything to that place? Between right and left, top and bottom, forward and back, right there. And he takes this on into headstand as well. As you know, in the Iyengar tradition, inversions are highly touted. The 5 inversions of headstand, shoulder stand, plow pose, bridge pose, and inverted lake. They all have to do with finding the midline, the center line of the body, and how that affects the vagus nerve is one of the most important cranial nerves for self-regulation in the body and creating a tremendously strong immune system, as well as a will of steel, because you hold these poses for a god-awful long time, and that's before you begin the variations. Nonetheless, at the beginning, he was a therapeutic master that also really appealed to me because I came into yoga with a back injury. And initially you realize there's nothing wrong with the posture. The asanas are fine as they are, but the person who comes into the pose, their body's not up to it. So we say at the beginning you have to mold the asana to the body because the body's too stiff and doesn't understand really how to do the pose at a deeper level. But later on, nothing wrong with the asana. You have to mold the body to the asana. And it takes a while to do. You can't hammer yourself into shape right away, especially these more convoluted poses. Not that you have to do any of the ones that look like a Cirque du Soleil extension of human possibility to be enlightened. Absolutely not. The simplest pose, lying down in Shavasana, or just sitting still, you can do that. But this is where you become a master of different inner realms and different subtleties, you could say. So one of the things that you learn by studying with him is that there are things that can be explained, like when we talk about the ethics, we can talk about what it means to be a virtuous human being, what does it mean to up your moral game, what does it mean to understand the karma of what you think, what you say, what you do, and the intentions behind those things, and how does your life turn out as a result of the cause and effect of those things. So those things can be explained. To some extent, I guess you could watch somebody else and model them. But in asana, it can be explained, and then it can be demonstrated. And then in certain ways, it can also be corrected from the outside. If there's a form that you're not doing well, the teacher can show you that. But then when you get to pranayama, it can be explained and partially demonstrated, because once it starts going inside you, and we haven't yet developed cameras to go up in your nostrils or into your lungs to show what's going on, then it can't be shown anymore, only on the outside. And then when you get to deep relaxation, again, the further you start going into the internal states, it can't be shown. You can experience it. And certainly with meditation, after a few preliminary explanations and one or two guidelines of visualizations, it's all happening internally. So a lot of yoga is about preparing you to trust your own insight, understand the sensations you're happening, understand how the brain communicates something and the mind gets it. Brain is local, mind is non-local everywhere. And so certain things that I took from him, and I could go on for a long time about the amount of things that I've learned from him, and maybe I will do something with his daughter Gita and his son Prashant, and then even the senior teachers that I've learned from over the years, is although the first principle in yoga is called ahimsa, nonviolence, and yet in the niyamas, there's an application called tapas, where you're really supposed to go for the goal, just really do it. And so sometimes people wonder, well, if you're not supposed to be violent and you're supposed to be peaceful in how you do it, well, how does tapas fit into that? And he would say that tapas is not a yama. The yamas are restraints. Tapas is not a restraint. It's something you're really supposed to put your total effort into, all your heart, all your soul into it. One-pointedness. Let nothing divert you, deflect you, dilute you. And so you have to learn what is that balance, to do things in a way that you're being harmless, and yet at the same time you have to find what's the edge, what's the maximum I can do without hurting myself. And he was very big on reminding people that there are stages in your growth. I think this is taken from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which even though it says Hatha Yoga, there are more shlokas, more lines on pranayama than there are about asana, indicating how important breath is to your total practice. And there's always what they call commencement, arambhavashta. You begin, you're just scratching the surface, you're getting to know what's going on. If you keep on going, you get to intent endeavor, gatavashta. You have to stay with it, right? If you're going to procure the benefits, it's an accrual system. You can't do it off and on. Hit and miss practice doesn't allow the benefits to accumulate. And then if you keep on going, you get a certain kind of intimate knowledge. You know it more from the inside, not the outside, by dint of the fact that you kept on going, and anyone who stopped before that couldn't go as far, they wouldn't understand that. And then if you keep on going from that, you get consummation. And consummation is where you kind of fuse or merge yourself with the message of yoga until your lifestyle becomes an embodiment of it. All right? So I love that idea. I also love another one of his ideas, which I take as like metaphoric. Even though the caste system existed in India, and I don't like to over-glorify the golden age of what we want to project and romantically project upon how their culture was. It was a patriarchal society. It was a slave society. They shit on women. And they had these varnas, which literally means color or caste, that had its own hierarchical top-down way of controlling the people. The Brahmins, the priests, were at the top, and then the Kshatriyas, they were the white-collar administrators, and the police, and the people who had the authority and oversaw a lot of the administrating of things, the executive function, you could say. Then there was the Vaishyas, the mom and pop blue-collar workers, the people that did all the mercantile stuff to keep society and commerce going. And then you had the Sudras, the people who were like the unskilled laborers and the people who bust the tables and did the lawns and moved the pig waste or whatever it was, and they were the lowest on the rung. And then, of course, there was the untouchables, the pariahs of the society, like our homeless people, coming out on the edge and afforded no legal status or opportunities for them to grow. Because if you were in the caste, you were fixed in the caste system. If you were a street sweeper from 9 to 5 in the morning, that's your life. But when you came home, you're still a street sweeper. But in our class, in our society, where it's economic mobility, even if you are a street sweeper or a janitor or custodial engineer, whatever, from 9 to 5, from 5 to 9, you're your own person. You can define yourself however you want to. You're not stuck in the social role. So I love the way he would say that each one of these castes are inside yourself. So for instance, everybody has an inner Brahman. Everybody has a part of themselves that is supposed to mediate between you and your secular life and your spiritual life. How do you connect to spirit? So there's one part of you that does that. Then you have another person who's like the Kshatriya, somebody who's the organizer, somebody who's the one who's delegating the responsibility, has an overview of what needs to be done, and then, like in the Marines, get her done, son. That's all you understand, right? You walk the talk, you make it happen, you oversee, you delegate, and therefore, in a certain way, you have a control. And then you have the people who are the vaishyas, the blue collar workers, the mercantile class. So that's the part of you that has to do the daily life, like I call the grunt. You are the one who's like, boots to the ground. If you're a parent, you got to take care of your kid. If you're a business person, you have to show up every day, open up, service your customers, and do all that kind of stuff. Well, there's a part of you that has to do that at whatever level that you define what that is for yourself. And then there's the sudras. There's the person who's the lowest in the totem pole. Well, you got to do it. Don't you got to pick up the dog poop? Don't you have to mow the grass? Don't you have to do the clean the dishes or clean the house, do the laundry, stuff like that? I mean, we'd rather do other things, right? Those throwaway actions. We think that if we earn enough money, we can pay somebody else to do it, and I'll have a completely hands-off life. Someone will do my lawn. Someone will clean my car. Someone will do my house. Someone will raise my kid. Someone will cook my food. I don't have to do anything, right? So the Sudra part of you is the one that's involved in all those labors. And then you could say there's another part of you that's like an untouchable. Things that have happened to you that make you feel less than, you're not worthy, you're ashamed about it. And some people have experiences where their early years were pathologically destroyed by the kind of trauma they had to face, and they're facing post-traumatic stress disorder for the rest of their life. So there's a part of us that feels like we're like a dog on the street with don't know if anybody's going to hit us or extend a nice hand to us, and so we're running scared, and we live a life with fear and being threatened and out of it, marginalized the whole time. So I like that way that you could look at yourself and realize the casts are inside yourself. But nonetheless, I'll stop here. Those are just a little things I got from BK Iyengar, and I want to finish off this week with one of my favorite stories that I heard again from Ramakrishna. But my favorite telling is from Joseph Campbell, so that's what we'll get. Once upon a time, there was a tiger who, in giving birth to her cub, she passed away. And the cub, being the kind of mammal that has a small window of opportunity to do what's called bonding, right? To glom on to some kind of maternal figure in order to have that need met post-birth. So, not even doing this consciously, the little cub wandered around trying to find some mother figure, something to hold on to develop at the next stage. And it just so happened that it came across a herd of sheep, and the sheep, being social animals, and also knowing the difference between a tiger cub with hardly any teeth and claws and a full-grown tiger, their natural predator, they took it in and started to raise it as one of its own. So it grew up learning sheep ways. It gamboled about like a sheep, watching the other little lambs do their thing. And it learned to eat grass, even though it didn't have the kind of hydrochloric acid in its stomach as a meat eater, but it did. And don't ask me how this happens, because I'm only the storyteller. I don't know how it happens, but it learned to even go, yeah, can you imagine that? Anyway, one day when it was enjoying its new life, I shouldn't say new life, because that implies it had some old life. This was the only life it knew. A full-grown tiger on the prowl comes across this herd of sheep and sees this cub in the midst of it, thought curiously to himself, what's this cub doing amongst the sheep? So it charges down to the sheep, and now the flock, knowing the difference between the full-grown tiger and the cub, it scatters for its life. But the tiger cub, innately having no fear of its own, stood there blinking, wondering, where's everybody going? And the big tiger comes up and says, what are you doing here? And the little cub looks up and goes, meh, meh. Oh my God, the tiger was mortified. It couldn't handle it. So it grabbed it by the scruff of its neck and puts it up and takes it next to the local lake and says, look at yourself. You're like me. And now, for the first time, the little cub, looking in the lake, is seeing its own true face as reflected in nature. And it looks at its own face, and it looks up at the tiger, and it looks at its own face, and it looks up at the tiger. It had to admit, it looked more like the tiger than it did the sheep. Now, I don't know how these things happen, but you know how these things happen. Somewhere from deep inside came Tiger Roar 101. Ah! Ooh, it freaked the cub out. Where did that come from? But secretly, it felt good. Then the big tiger took the cub back to its cave, where it had a gazelle that was recently killed. It grabbed a chunk of bloody meat, gave it to the cub and said, "Here, eat." And the little cub said, "But I'm a vegetarian." And the tiger said, "We'll have none of that now." And it shoved the meat in its maw and it started to gag on it. And the comment in the scripture says, "As all do on true doctrine." But once its proper nourishment got into its system, once it started to feel what it should have been eating from day one, once it started to assimilate what was truly the nourishment that was its own, what was proper for it. I don't know how these things happen, but you know how these things happen. Somewhere from deeper inside came Tiger Roar 102. That didn't feel strange at all. It felt really, really right. Then the big tiger said, "Now come, let's go into the forest and I'll show you how to hunt for tiger food." So what's the moral of this story? Well, when you practice yoga, sometimes you have people who are naysayers, whiners, complainers, disbelievers. They've had a bad experience, they have no experience, and they're talking out of their hat. And so maybe when you come back from a yoga class, they say, so what'd you do in yoga? You wrap your leg around your neck? Is that what you did? So you look like a pretzel? No, we didn't do that. No. But you rocked autistically to the sound of your own Om, right? No, we didn't do that either. Oh, but you had to study your navel, right? You had to be a navel gazer, right? Interminably watching your belly button, right? No, we didn't do that either. Oh, well, did your teacher have something to say? Oh, yeah, my teacher had something to say. Well, what did they say? My teacher said that the purpose of yoga was to discover your tiger face. Namaste, everyone.